Now here we want to talk about the main features of urban transportation management. We will do so by distinguishing between the performance dimension, the management of the different transportation modes and infrastructures, and at the end we will actually ask the question of who is really in charge of the urban transportation system. Now, the main performance dimensions, there are actually two such dimensions, and this is the performance of the urban transportation system as a whole. We're not talking here about the performance of the bus or the taxi or something like that. We're talking about the performance of the overall urban transportation system. Now, the first criteria really is efficiency. How efficient is that system? How much time do you actually need? How much time do you spend in the urban transportation system? This relates to congestion, the congestion of the overall system, and of course also about the reliability, the planability of that. You may take a little longer, but you are sure it's going to take you that time. That much time is different from, say, okay, sometimes it takes me half an hour, sometimes it takes me 1 hour. So this is the time efficiency of the urban transportation. Then there is an energy efficiency issue. We have seen that 30% of global energy consumption is actually used by transport, by urban transport, and 25% of the CO2 emissions of a city stem directly from transport. So the efficiency question here is, how much energy do you consume? Can you reduce that? Can you get the same transportation service with less energy consumed? And can you pollute less? And the third efficiency criteria, of course, is the economic criteria of cost. How cost effective is your urban transportation system compared to how much you pay for it? How many services do you actually get out of it? And there, as we know, there are two types of payments. There are prices for the transport, and then there are subsidies by the public authorities for this transport. But in both cases, it's an efficiency question, of course. The second important criteria is the attractiveness of public transport, of urban public transport vis-a-vis the car. It is a given that the urban public transport should substitute as much as possible the car. And here the question is, how accessible is urban public transport? Do you have a bus stand? The generally agreed idea today is that somehow within 5 minutes walking distance, you should have the ability to access a bus or a metro or a bike stand or something like this. And so the accessibility is one of the first criteria of attractiveness. The second criterion is the affordability. How affordable is that system? And affordability, as we have discussed before in a previous block, affordability is very much related to social criteria. It may be affordable for rich people, but not affordable for poor people. You want to make urban public transport affordable for everyone. The third element here is the intermodality. What sense does it make to buy a ticket for the bus, then to get out, wait for a train, buy another ticket, and use the credit card for your bike? Ideally, you would like to have one ticket. Ideally, you would have to have everything nicely all the different modes nicely interconnected, and that will make your urban public transport system much more attractive vis-a-vis the car. If you have to take the car before you can take the bus and before you can take the train, then that is not a really attractive system, because probably you will have a problem finding a parking space somewhere. And the fourth criterion here is convenience. And by convenience, we mean, is the bus clean? Is the train clean? Is there AC? Are you harassed? Is the bus driver friendly? These kind of things. So basically two things that are important here. You want the urban transportation system to be efficient in cost, time, and energy terms, and you want it to be attractive. And the management of the urban transportation system, how it is managed, will decide how well performing it is, how attractive it is, how efficient it ultimately is. So the management is the function by which attractiveness and efficiency of urban public transport is created. Now let's look at the different management functions. And here we will already see how difficult it is to achieve that. Now, we have operations, okay? So basically, it is operations of the vehicles, operations of the interfaces, operations of the infrastructures. There are technical aspects to that. There are times tables that need to be operated. There are human resources that need to be managed. And then there's everything that relates to the customers relations. The fares need to be collected. The complaints need to be handled. The customers need to be informed. They need to have a hotline, things like that. So first management function, how well is the operations of that urban and infrastructure system done? And as we will see later, each mode, each operator has their own operations. There is no overall operations. We have talked about maintenance, the maintenance of infrastructures, vehicles, and interfaces. And here, of course, you have to maintain every single infrastructure separately, every vehicle separately, every interface, every station separately. But the challenge, of course, for management of urban infrastructure or transport infrastructures is how to coordinate all this. So when you repair the tram line in the street, you don't want to block the street during the day. You want to block it during the night in order not to hamper the other transport modes. Coordination of maintenance. And the third one is, of course, planning, as we have seen. Infrastructures need to be planned, interfaces need to be planned, new vehicles need to be bought, and the buying need to be bought. Again, these different things need to be coordinated among each other in order to make the urban transportation system efficient and attractive. Now, how is this concretely done? Now that we have the different transport modes and the different transportation infrastructures, and each of them has actually their own management logic. Let's start with the roads. We have seen that the roads are the biggest chunk of the urban transport infrastructure. So most of it are roads. And how are roads managed? Roads are generally not only planned, but maintained and often even managed by a city road department that operates the road, that plans the road, that maintains the road. Is a separate department in each city. We actually remember, we have talked about jurisdictional challenges, and most of the major cities of the world are not composed of one city, but they're composed of several cities. So each of these cities has their own road department. Now, taxis are running on the road. They are using the road, okay? And so taxis are basically private operators licensed by a public authority, a local taxi authority. Again, we have probably, and you have experienced that, cities, agglomerations, metropolitan areas with several cities, each of them having their own local taxi authority licensing their own taxi company or companies. Then we have buses, minibuses, public buses, and private bus companies. This is maybe the most coordinated thing you can find in the city. There is a local transport authority, generally, And this local transport authority licenses or controls the different bus operating companies and hopefully makes some sort of coordination among these bus companies when they plan the timetables or the tickets or the intermodal links with other transport modes. But the local transport authority is a different authority than the local taxi authority and is a different authority than the city road department. And again, in the case of metropolitan areas where you have different cities, you will have different local transport authorities. The effort, of course, being to creating one single one in a metropolitan area. And then you have the other transport modes. You have trams. Now, trams are companies in their own, which own their own tracks, which basically organize themselves. They manage themselves, they operate, they maintain, and they plan for themselves. Not necessarily, rarely coordinated with any of the other authorities. The same goes actually for the agglomeration metro operator, which owns the tracks and operates the metro, but is not necessarily working under the local transport authority. And then we have thirdly, the national train operator, which crosses the city and has stations in the city, operates the tracks and even the railway stations. But this operator is a national operator, not a local, a metropolitan operator. Each of these operators, the train operator, the tram operator, the metro operator, the transport authority, the taxi authority, the city road authority, they all operate, they all function separately and are not necessarily coherent. So you see the challenge of providing an efficient and an attractive public transport system with such a fragmented type of operators. Let me illustrate that again in another format by asking who actually is in charge. So who is in charge? We have the different transport modes: cycles, cars, buses, trams, metros, and trains. And we have different ways of coordinating competition, tendering, and monopoly, as we have seen. Let's start with bicycles, a new addition to the city. But bicycles, we may have a public bike provider by the city. The city provides public bikes, which can be free or not free. There may be in parallel to that a private or several bike sharing company operating inside the city. Bike sharing company has probably a license and is tendered, whereas the public bike provider is there by virtue of a monopoly of the city. They may compete against each other. As for the cars, we have different types of cars operating, and I'm not even talking now about Uber and new types of taxis and vehicles operating in the city, car sharing and all that. But basically we can have private car sharing companies. They are competing against each other and are basically unregulated. Then we can have, and we do have private car rental companies which are competing against each other and are not regulated. And then we have taxi companies, private taxi companies, as we have seen. They are generally tendered and licensed by a local authority. All of them provide car services. As for buses, we have private minibus companies, private bus companies, public bus companies. As we have seen before, all of these are generally somehow coordinated by a city transport authority, but some are tendered, some are there by virtue of being publicly owned by the city. The tram, as we have seen before, is generally a public trans company, a monopolistic public tram company, which can or cannot operate under the local transport authority. The same goes for the metro company, which can be a public company, a city-owned company, or a private metro operator. It has a license, it is authorized by someone, but not necessarily operating under the control of the transport authority of the city. And then we have a public transport authority, public transport company, which can basically own all the three, the bus, the tram, and the metro, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the case. And then for trains, we basically have a public train company which is nationally owned. So I ask you, who is in charge? Who is in charge of the urban public transport system? So what have we seen? We have seen a basically fragmented and uncoordinated urban transport system. And this contrasts very much with the thing I have presented in the previous block, namely urban electricity. We have historically one urban electricity operator, which is getting a little bit fragmented because of competition, but basically it's one operator of the urban electricity system. In the case of transport, we have nothing like it. So who can then make urban transport more efficient and more attractive? We have seen that these are the two main performance criteria that one should strive at. Now, you may say the city should do that, but the city, we have seen, is several things. It is a transport authority, the city is a road department, the city is a taxi licensing authority, the city may be the tram owner, the metro owner. The city, in terms of transport, is not necessarily a coherently operating thing, which can by itself create efficiency and attractiveness of urban public transport. So then who can speak for the mobility needs of the urban transport customers? When we talked about the criteria before, I showed you that what the customer wants is convenience, intermodality, time efficiency, energy efficiency, things like that. It is difficult to imagine how the mobility needs of the urban public transport user can actually be satisfied with such a fragmented system. So in the next session, we will hear from an expert about this, and in the session thereafter, we will hear from a CEO of one of the operators in a city context, an urban bus operator, how this all looks like.